Well, I think we'll get started. I imagine we'll have some people coming in as it gets going, but looks like there's plenty of room. Um, just want to make sure that you guys know as you come in and out, you're getting scanned already. I do know that sometimes you guys want to stand if you get tired of sitting all day long, so that's fine. Just don't stand close to the doors, and we'll help pull people in from the doors. If you're standing by the doors, the sensors could kick you out of the room and you couldn't get credit automatically for the CEUs, so we'll want people to come all the way in and sit down. And then I think most of you guys are already slid inside, and like I said, there's plenty of room for folks, so we're good there. The session today is the emergency contracting, whether it's a major landslide resulting in extensive roadway damage, a bridge hit that exceeds normal repair options, flooding that damages the road and or bridges, or some other emergency situation. Know what steps to take after something like this occurs. Need a contractor assist with major repairs, stabilization, constructability input, etc. Emergency contracting may be just what you need. So the presenters today, will start with Rob Wight and give you a little bit on Rob. Rob is the Director of Construction at the Utah Department of Transportation. He earned a bachelor's degree in Civil and Environmental Engineering in 1993 and a master's degree in Engineering Management in 1994 from BYU. Most of his 20 years at UDOT has been in the construction management and maintenance areas and is currently leading the implementation of UDOT's e-construction initiative. He has been a member of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Construction since 2011 and currently serves as the Vice Chair. He is also a member of TRB's AFH 10 Committee on Construction Management. He is a licensed professional and structural engineer in the state of Utah. He is married and has 5 children and enjoys hiking, running, cycling, and climbing. Cheryl Hersh is the Structures Design Manager for UDOT Structures Division. She has served in this capacity since joining UDOT nearly 5 years ago. Prior to working at UDOT, she spent 23 years in the private sector with a focus on project delivery and construction as a designer, resident engineer, project manager, and design quality manager. She is a member of the AASHTO Subcommittee on Bridges and Structures and chairs the Technical Committee on Bridge Security and Hazards T1 and serves on the Technical Committee for Research T11. She earned a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Duke University and a master's degree in structural engineering from University of Virginia. And then Becky next will be presenting as well. She is the bridge management engineer for UDOT. She is a graduate of the University of Utah and has 12 years of experience in hydraulic and bridge design, planning, programming, and inspection. Over the last 5 years, she has been heavily involved in the emergency contracting for structures. So I'll welcome them, and we'll turn the time over to Rob.
Thanks for being here so early on a Wednesday morning. Hopefully we'll stay awake during the session, and I'll move around up here enough to keep you awake. Photo up here, does that look familiar, Leif? When I was driving back from St. George, actually I was not driving, full disclosure, but I was in the car coming back from St. George, and I get a call I think it was a text from Rick Torgerson that said, we got a problem on SR 12, and we need to get a contractor out here to fix this. What do I do? And we do these fairly infrequently, and so I had to go back and find a manual that Chris Peterson had put together several years ago from the last time that we had done one of these, and so to find out what it was that we needed to do. Now, my purpose here today, and our purpose here today, is to not make you experts in emergency contracting, but to hopefully help you find contacts and the ability that you know who to contact when something like this occurs. And we're going to hand out a checklist towards the end also, so that you have kind of a ready reference that you can keep posted on your bulletin board by your desk or wherever you remember, so that you'll be able to know what we need to do to get emergency contracting in place. So the first things you do, I'm just going to kind of go through some of the steps that are in our emergency contracting guide. Just right off the top, I got to tell you that Carlos, or our executive director, is authorized to perform emergency contracting, but there are some stipulations that we're going to go through throughout the session. The first time something like this happens, and this also probably looks familiar to Leif. It's a different situation a few years ago, but it seems like they always happen down in the Cedar area. We've got a bunch of them down there in the last few years. This was the rock slide up Cedar Canyon, for those of you who may not know. The first thing is to identify and notify emergency contacts for the event. Okay, so you've got to call somebody, and typically that's going to be somebody at Central Construction. Identify a lead investigator. Now, a lead investigator sounds pretty. I'm going to stand over here so everybody can see the slides. Lead investigator sounds pretty official, but essentially it's just a PM. That's what you're wanting to do is get a PM. Is it a roadway emergency? If it's a roadway emergency, contact Michelle or myself. If it's a structure emergency, Carmen would be the person that you would contact. Determine the limit, scope, and budget as best you can. We understand that these are emergencies, and it may not be readily apparent how much work needs to be done to repair the job, but you need to make sure that you do the best that you can in the time allowed. One of the things that we found helpful, and is not necessarily required, but establishing an electronic documentation file, because it's going to be a quick hit. You're going to be involving a lot of people. It's good to have either a Google Drive or some way that everybody can have access to these. I know we did this on both of the emergency fixes that we've had this year, and that's been very helpful to be able to give everybody access to the information that they need to be able to progress the emergency contract. Okay, so the first thing is to determine if an event is an emergency. Okay, what constitutes an emergency? Well, I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide real quick. This is the definition in state code of an emergency. If we need to perform emergency contracting, it's because we need to eliminate an imminent risk of damage to or loss of public or private property, remedy a condition that poses an immediate physical danger, a rock slide that's about to take out some kind of a structure or something. That would be a situation. Or reduce a substantial imminent risk of interruption of an essential public service. Now on SR 12, when I talked to Rick said this could cut off access to several towns. And they would have to take a 100-mile detour to be able to reach essential public services such as hospital, health care, that kind of thing. So those are the types of things that constitute an emergency, okay? Any questions on that, or any other thoughts or concerns that you might have on how you determine if something is an emergency? Okay, you guys got it. All right. Let's go back to the previous slide here. Okay. So the next thing you do after you determine that it's emergency, you need to do an on-site review and analysis. Go through what is it that's happened, get as much information as you can in the short period of time. You may need to be calling experts. Our central geotech, I know we're involved in the SR 12 slide. There may be structure experts that need to come out on the site and look at it, but you try to get those down as quickly as possible. Also, another thing that's important is to bring a contractor in place, and they can start looking at what possible fixes might be needed to take care of this particular situation. Sometimes that will involve specialty contractors, a geotech specialist, or something like that. The next thing you need to do, and as quickly as possible, is to have requested an emergency declaration, coordinating with the region director and your central personnel, and having one of UDOT's attorneys general draft a resolution that Carlos can sign to declare this an emergency. Very important. That gets the ball rolling, and then we are officially authorized to begin emergency contracting. If federal funds, just a heads up, if federal funds are going to be used, we also need to get the FHWA division administrator involved. In the case of SR 12, just their bar is a lot higher than ours, and so if at all possible, I would try to do it with state funds, just because the federal process is a little more difficult and a little more time consuming. So if it's something that's something that you want to get done quickly, it's probably better to use state funds if state funds are available. I'm not going to get into too much of the federal process, but just know that it has to be signed by the division administrator. Okay, we already went through this. So if the event is not determined an emergency, none of those three conditions that I talked about in the previous slide are there. An example of that would be the I-80 job. Those of you from Region 2 know that there was some severe, a water line broke up near Rocky Road and flooded the ramp. While that was something that was definitely alarming and a kind of a mess for traffic, essential public services were not compromised, and so it was not determined emergency. And the work was done by our maintenance forces. In that case, that would not be considered an emergency. So maybe an example of two things that one would be emergency and one would not. Some of it's the scope, some of it is, does it cut off emergency services? Under the declaration of emergency, your designated project authority is assigned to begin emergency contracting efforts. That opens the door from our typical contracting process and gives us more flexibility to be able to procure materials, contracting ability, those types of things quickly. So the director is granted the authority to obtain goods and services without execution of a state contract. So we can put a contractor to work immediately if there's something that that the director determines is an emergency. A contractor can provide a bid, and if selected, start working immediately. The legal contract will follow. Now, I know that might give some people a little bit of heartburn. It gives us a little bit of heartburn, and we don't like to do this unless we absolutely have to. And that's why it's very important that we get up front a declaration of emergency from the director. Okay. Any questions? Any thoughts? The contractors that have been through this process, I know it's a little bit different than our typical process, and so it makes everybody uncomfortable. But remember, we're trying to maintain an essential public service to our customers. So selecting of a contractor, we want to give the opportunity to get as much competition as possible. Have several contractors come out and look at this. In some cases, the 191 project, we didn't have a lot of interest from contractors. For those of you who may not be aware, the road from Vernal up to Flaming Gorge had a culvert that was settling, and there was a big bump in the road, and we were afraid we were going to lose the culvert. But we had a problem getting any contractors interested in it because it was right at the beginning of construction season, of a lot of folks busy. But we did get one contractor to come and actually give us a bid on that. That was as much competition as we had available at that time. So that's the key, is get as much competition. On the SR-12, we had, 4 contractors submit bids on that one? 4 looked and 3 submitted. So it's a pretty quick look at it, and they give you a ballpark, hey, we think it's going to be this. Now, in those situations, that's as much competition as we could under the circumstances. And that's what the policy states. If we already have procurement contracts out there, that's another way we can do this work. We just do it under a procurement contract that's already in place and just have the different items of work. Typically, we don't have this type of procurement contract, but it is an option if there are procurement contracts out there. And then the other option, and we looked at this on SR-12, is just adding it into another work that a contractor is doing that's nearby. That is actually the quickest way and the easiest way and the most solid way to get something like this done, is because you already have a contract in place and it would just be a matter of issuing a change order. So that's another option that is a pretty good option. Any questions on that? Any thoughts, concerns? Okay. So any contracts under $100,000 will go through central procurement. Any contracts over $100,000 will come through our office in central construction, and we will process similar to how we process our typical contracts. It's going to be expedited, and again, you can get to work before the contract is actually executed, but that's how that works. The contracts will be prepared and executed as soon as practical. I just mentioned that, and the contract date will correspond to the written authorization to proceed date. And then again, UDOT comptroller will provide written justification for this date to the state comptroller. So we're making sure we're getting the payments made properly. Anything else you want to add to that, Michelle? Okay. Okay, I'm not sure what this one is. That looks pretty scary, doesn't it? Was that 14? Okay. So determine the best course of action to be taken, develop the scope of the emergency work. That's important. Everybody who's involved with this on the contracting side, you need to have, and I know it's hard in a couple of days to put together a decent scope of work, but that's important. Develop a cost estimate, and then procure the contractor. Go through and actually get the contract in place, and give written authorization to the contractor to proceed in performing the work. Now on SR 12, this kind of came, and there was a lot of back and forth between the internal groups to get a scope together. I know Geotech put a scope together pretty quickly, relatively quickly, but getting the authorization to the contractor, the contractor is kind of going ahead and getting materials and equipment to the site. But again, this is an emergency, and this is not our typical process, but the way to get the contractor out there as quickly as possible. And then we need some way to oversee the contractor's activities, similar to our construction process that we currently have in place now. Leif, I mean, your crew was out there continuously watching this slide, making sure that we didn't lose the rest of the road, and so you were out there already.
Maintenance was to help them do that monitoring, but then our crew was also, and then our crew took over the project and
And so you managed it similar to the way you would manage any other construction project after that. Okay, just something to remember. So this is determining the written authorization to proceed. We've mentioned those things before, and again, get the best information that you can at the time. Some of this you're going to have to work through with the contractor through the process, but again, quickly we try and get the best information we can. In an emergency, only provide supplies, services, and construction items necessary for repairs. That's something to keep in mind. We want to just repair the facility as it exists. If you have work that's coming through in a couple of years, hey, we're going to go ahead and widen this road in a couple of years, do not do that under the emergency contract. That should go through the regular contracting procedures. So there's a temptation to have, once we have a contractor out there, hey, while you're out there, could you also replace this culvert that's half a mile down the road? Do not do that under the emergency contract. We want that to be bid out under our regular process. That's not an emergency. Go ahead.
Did you ever use a workforce account, time and materials?
That's how a lot of it is paid. And we did time and materials on several items. And I believe Leif left the room, so he can't answer that. But a lot of it was done time and materials. So yes, you can do it that way. You try and get the best estimate that you can in the short amount of time you have, but time and materials a lot of it's going to be that way. We would go under our force account rules or something like that to be able to determine how we're going to pay the contractor. Any other comments or thoughts, questions? So once disbursement may be made upon the receipt of invoices, receipts, or other statements describing the goods and services utilized and amount to be paid. This is not going to be as nice and clean as a typical construction project where we go out and say, okay, these are the items we're going to pay for. In some cases, it may be force account sheets that our inspectors are just keeping track of. Okay, they have this much equipment, they have this much, they've delivered this many materials, we have the invoices. But again, get as much documentation as you can. What we need to make sure of is that we're paying for the goods and services that we've actually received, and that those that are working on the project, we're keeping track of that. So think of it as a force account. Those of you who have done force account work before, that's kind of the situation that we're in right here. And again, a contract must be executed as soon as possible. They can start work without a contract, but we need to make sure that we're not just, okay, now we're go, let's worry about the contract later. It still needs to be executed as soon as possible. And we're going to help you in central construction with that. We're going to try and get as many of the typical things that we do with our contract done as part of that. So we're going to try and get the right-of-way cert. We're going to try and get, and in the case of SR 12, we were actually working outside of our right-of-way, but we got a letter from the Park Service to allow us to do that. And so that's good enough for an emergency contract. And if we need to go back later and figure out some right-of-way lines or where the right-of-way was, we can do that. But we're going to take care of the emergency first. Within 24 hours, the Emergency Project Authority must make a written report of the circumstances, the nature of the value, and the commitments to the UDOT comptroller, and that's going to allow us to pay the contractor, because the comptroller needs that to be able to pay the contractor. And you can do that on email. It doesn't need to be an official report that's mailed. Okay. Seems like we're not, oh, there we go. Okay. Now we're going to turn some time over to Becky and Cheryl, and they're going to talk specifically about the structure emergency bridge hits. Do you want this?
I'm not going to talk long, so I'm just going to talk at the mic up here. A secondary type of emergency we have is ones that are not critical or not work that needs to be done in, a couple days' time. There's not safety aspects to it, and there's not I'm missing info off the slides. So.
Do you want me to switch it over? I just realized Rob's version is different than your version, and I do have your version. We can switch it real quick.
Sorry.
Okay, brief intermission.
Yep.
I'm like, that does not have her content on it.
Sorry about that, guys.
One moment of technical difficulty.
I'll
So
switch
it's
around
missing
where I can
everything.
see it. How will this affect the recording? Will it switch when I switch a PowerPoint? What do you need to do on your end? It'll be fine? Okay.
Okay. So like I was saying, these are kind of secondary emergencies. There's not immediate safety risks. There's not concerns of damage to the facility immediately. There's not issues of a structure coming down or risks to the general traveling public. So these are kind of a longer range type of structural emergency that we want to try and get somebody out. We want to get the project advertised within 60 to 90 days of finding the emergency. And then these go out to a pre-selected pool of contractors that we have. In the past, we've always had it for structures, but we're in the process now of selecting one for geotechnical emergencies as well. These aren't ones that require immediate closure. They don't have imminent risk, or we've mitigated for any imminent risk, and then we can get a contractor on board. These typically require design plans. The key portion of it is when we have a structure hit. These happen pretty frequently, and probably a lot more frequently than people realize. We generally have projects 10 to 15 a year, just based on people striking under clearance structures, or they've got their loads up or something else to where they're striking our bridges. This was one where they tried to take a JLG underneath one of our bridges and didn't quite make it through. So it caused quite a bit of damage to the girders, but it wasn't structurally significant to the point that we had to restrict traffic on top of the structure. And then it's something that needs to be addressed quickly, but it's not something that has to be addressed the next day. And these contracts were limited to $500,000 on the repairs. So sometimes they're getting close to that $500,000, but typically it's going out and doing a repair. Sometimes we can get 1 or 2 girders replaced under that cost, but a lot of times it's just a repair or a straightening of beams. The first thing that happens is if we've got a structure hit, we get a page from the TOC letting us know that there's been a hit, and we have someone out right away to respond. Generally, it's Clint, our emergency coordinator. He'll go out, or we'll coordinate with someone else on our staff. If it's in some of the more remote areas in Utah, we'll send out someone from the maintenance stations or from the region to do an initial assessment, and then they'll come back and let us know, do we need to get down right away, or is it something we can come look at in the next day or two? So as soon as we get out on site, we assess, is there anything that's an imminent risk? Do we need to remove concrete that's loose or at risk of falling? Do we need to close any lanes? Do we need to close shoulders? Do we need to be restricting traffic at the time? So that's our first assessment on it. The second assessment we make is the damage something that needs to be repaired? If it's a really minor chip in a girder, we're not exposing any rebar, we're not limiting the capacity on it. A lot of times we'll just leave it as is. If there is damage, girders that are bent or reinforcing that's exposed or damaged, then we'll start initiating a project. Now, these projects generally go through the same type of process as a normal project. It's just on a much expedited schedule. So we start off, as soon as we know that there's going to be a project, we initiate the project in EPM. It goes through mapping it out just like a normal project, putting in all the project information. And then as soon as we've got that, we request the project to be funded and request a PM from the region. So this portion of it is very similar to a normal project, but as soon as we know this is happening, we let all parties involved know that this is an emergency project and it will be going through the expedited process, and then we have that 60 to 90 days to advertise. So all parties are kind of aware right up front that this will go quickly. A lot of times we've started design on the structures point before we even have a PM assigned or the full team assigned. In addition to structure hits, also if we have a critical finding during our regular structure inspection, a lot of times that will go through this. We had a pedestrian stairway that was on a path to a school that we found some severe cracks in the stairway. And so with that one, we closed the stairwell right away and got it shored up, but we knew we had to keep that critical path to the schools open, so that went through this same process to go replace that stairwell and make sure that there was a safe path for the kids to get to school. Or if we lose a bearing, but there's no imminent risk of collapse or settlement of the structure, then we'll send it through this same process for the replacement. As soon as we have a PM assigned on it, then it goes over to our design group, and Cheryl's going to talk a little bit about that process.
Okay, from a design perspective, once it comes to our group, it looks very similar to any other project. So it pretty much follows the PDN, but again, as Becky said, it's a streamlined process. Once we get it, we try to get it ready for advertisement within 30 days. So with that, we just basically start with, you're not expected to really read this. I just want you to know that it's the same process. It's just condensed. So it should look very familiar to any other project. You have to still get the team together because there'll still be limitations of operations. There'll still be other aspects of the project that you need region support on, as well as, roadway designers, MOT, and most of the time, the structures, we've been doing those in-house, but we often, depending on workload and how many of these we get at a time, they could go to a consultant as well. So you just need to know that, again, you basically scope it, but then it just moves into final design. The one thing is a PDD is not required because this is a very limited scope. All we are doing is addressing the needed repair. So basically the schedule is you have your kickoff right away within 1 week of identifying the project. You go to PS&E within 3 weeks, and then the sign off for the 5S1 is 1 week. So really close to that 30 days from the time you start design. Any questions?
I was curious, when they do those structures, does the funding come from insurance companies to pay for those, or does it come in?
So that's, not initially, but we do put in claims. I mean, there's a process.
And I'm going to talk about that a little bit
Yeah.
more as well.
Yep. So that's a lot of why we limit the work to just the repair, because most of the time there is insurance involved. Anything else? So again, very simple. We try to streamline it. The one thing to remember is, again, we're putting together a set of plans, specs, MMP. It gets bid by the contractors on our pool for this work. So it looks like any other package in that respect. Okay, back to Becky.
So as soon as we have the 5S1 sign off, then it comes back over to our group, and we start the advertising process on it. This is a pretty expedited process. It's not the 6 weeks of advertising that we see on traditional projects. So as soon as it comes back to our group, we request the funding authorization through program finance. This is usually a day process. It moves pretty quick, and then we send it over to our advertising group. It's a little bit of a minimized advertising package on this. We don't have all of the checklist items as part of the emergency projects just because of the emergency nature of them. Typically, we've got about a 1 to 2 day turnaround. We work really closely with the advertising group on this so that they know it's coming and they can set time aside in their schedule. Now, rather than going out through the typical advertising process where it gets posted to the website, it gets emailed out to each of the individual contractors that are on that pool. Generally, we have a 7 to 14 day advertising time frame for this, depending on the complexity of the project. Most of the time, it's 7 days. So they've got 7 days to respond on it. They do put the bid in through the same system, and it gets awarded low bid, just like any of the other projects. Then we try to get notice to proceed fairly quickly and get the contractor out there. Like Cheryl was talking about, a lot of these are insurance claims, and so they're initially funded with state project money. We limit it absolutely no work outside of what's absolutely necessary to fix the repair. Once we wrap up the project, that's when we submit all of our documentation to insurance and we start pursuing insurance reimbursement. In the past, we were getting maybe 40 to 50% reimbursement on it. It was pretty low. And now I think we're right around the 90 to 95%. So it's really key for us during construction to really well document this. We're not training extra people out for inspection during these projects. We're not having extra people out. We're not doing any extra work. We're not doing change orders. And documentation is key, getting pictures throughout the process and making sure that we're just limiting that work completely. So we send a lot of documentation over for that fun insurance process. If any of you have gone through insurance claims before, you know it's a struggle from day one, but we've gotten pretty streamlined on this process, and generally we're recovering most of the funds on ones that are bridge hits. This one was actually kind of an interesting project. Somebody hit the girder with a track hoe. I think Carmen and I both got several calls on this one because everyone was concerned that the bridge was coming down with the amount of damage. It pushed the girder out of alignment about 18 inches and punctured a hole in it. But given the redundancy on the structure and also the fact that this was under the shoulder, it was pretty minimal work, and our contractor was able to come out, replace just small sections of the web on the girder, and they got it pretty well straightened up. You can see in this picture how far it's pushed out of alignment, and this was just this last weekend. They've got it almost completely straightened up, and they're ready to paint it and get it back into full service and open that shoulder back up. So we're able to do quite a bit with that $500,000 limit, and our contractors have gotten really good to the point that we can do a lot of repairs in lieu of replacements. But yeah, as soon as we get the insurance figured out on it, then we go through standard project closeout, and that's kind of the process on these, if anybody's got any questions on them.
Do you guys hire out like an RE to take over the project, or do you handle construction?
We have an RE assigned to the project, and they'll generally have an inspector that's out there to check traffic control and some of those items. But we're also heavily involved from the inspection side from the structure standpoint, just because usually there's not a lot of expertise on this type of repair. And so we'll have Clint out or other members from our staff out during this. So, yep.
Is there typically a loss of remaining life of those components damaged, and is the state compensated through the insurance claims on those?
There generally is some sort of loss, but it's really hard to put a dollar amount on that, and it's hard enough to get the full cost reimbursed just for the actual repair with bills that we can physically show them. So to try to do a theoretical, we haven't pursued that in the past just because it would end up for sure in litigation. And at that point, it's probably more of a loss through litigation than it would be to what we would gain. So, any other questions on this process or the standard emergency process?
We do have copies of the emergency procedure checklist. This would be good to have. This is something you can reference later. If you would like to come up and get a copy of that, then when something like this happens, as it happens with the bridge hits, it's fairly frequent. With the emergency contracting, it's much less frequent, and so every time we do it, it seems like we have to relearn the process, and we pull out the old manual. But it would be good if you wanted a copy of this to keep with you. For those district engineers, REs, project manager, region folks, we've got copies up here.
The other thing I'll add is we're gonna update the manual and post the manual and this checklist online. So if it's after, I'd say January, because we've still gotta take this to tech committee with our updates that we found as we were going through these last couple emergencies, then it'll be available online after that. So, and you can always call Rob or I or Structures for a copy of the procedures, and we'll help you through the process.
And now that if this does come up, just give us a call. We can walk you through it. That's what we did the last time. I think in the end, there's a lot of running around, a lot of figuring things out, but we got it done, and the important thing is to restore the service as quickly as possible to the public. So thank you for being here today, and if you do want to come up and talk to us after, we'll hang around here for a few minutes.